The gavel cracked like a gunshot in the cramped, humid courtroom of Session Judge Alistair Vance. It was a sound meant to impose order. But in courtroom number 4, order had long since fled. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, cheap perfume, and the acrid tang of injustice. The case was a grimly familiar one. Samuel Reed, a frail taxi driver in his late 50s, stood accused of assaulting Robert Blackwood, a well-connected property developer with a smug face and a silk tie. The truth, as whispered in the galleries, was the reverse. Blackwood's men had tried to bulldoze Samuel's street-side newsstand, a wooden kiosk that was his only possession. Samuel had resisted. A scuffle ensued. Now he was the one in the dock. His son, Ethan, a wiry young man of 22 with eyes burning like hot coals, stood beside the public defender. His fists clenched so tight his knuckles were white. The proceedings were a farce. Blackwood's high-priced lawyer, a man named Harrington with a voice like smooth whiskey, spun a tale of unprovoked attack by a public nuisance. The overworked public defender stammered through weak objections. Judge Vance, looking bored and impatient, glanced at his wristwatch. He had a club dinner to attend. It was clear to everyone how this would end. Ethan could see it in the casual shrug of the bailiff, in the bored note-taking of the stenographer. His father, a man who had broken his back for 30 years to raise him, was about to be convicted on false charges. The injustice was a physical weight on Ethan's chest, making it hard to breathe. Then Blackwood took the stand. Lying with a polished ease, he described Samuel as a violent vagrant. "My client," Harrington said grandly, "is a pillar of the community. He fears for his safety. We demand maximum sentencing as a deterrent to such street elements." That was the moment something in Ethan snapped. The carefully constructed dam of restraint broke. A low guttural sound escaped his lips. He lunged forward, not towards Blackwood, but towards the 2 burly policemen who flanked his father. His movements were a blur of desperate fury. He shoved one officer aside and grabbed the other's arm, pulling him away from Samuel. "Let go of my father," he roared, his voice raw, tearing through the perfunctory legal drone. The courtroom froze for a split second, a tableau of shock. Then, as Ethan shielded his weeping father, he turned his blazing eyes towards the judge, towards Blackwood, towards the entire edifice of corruption masquerading as law. His next words were not a shout, but a searing, venomous promise, delivered with a chilling clarity that silenced the emerging murmurs. "And I'll make you walk." The silence held for a heartbeat longer. Then it erupted. Robert Blackwood let out a bark of laughter, a rich, contemptuous sound. It was infectious. The bailiff smirked. The junior lawyers at the back snickered. Even a couple of journalists chuckled. The absurdity of it. A penniless boy threatening the court? It was the comic relief the dreary day needed. The laughter swelled, washing over Ethan and his father like a wave of derision. Blackwood, wiping a mock tear, said to his lawyer, "Did you hear that? He'll make us walk." Perhaps to the bank. More laughter. Judge Vance initially allowed a thin smile to play on his lips, shaking his head at the youthful dramatics. He raised his gavel to restore order. But then he looked at Ethan. He saw no hysteria, no blind rage. He saw a terrifying crystalline certainty. The laughter in the room was loud, but it was superficial, nervous. The boy's threat hung in the air, refusing to be laughed away. And something happened. Perhaps it was a trick of the light, or a sudden draft, but Judge Vance felt a chill. His smile vanished. He slowly, deliberately placed the gavel down. He did not sit back in his high chair. Instead, he leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, his eyes locked with Ethan's. The laughter began to die, strangled by the judge's unexpected intensity. The room grew quiet again, but this was a different, pregnant silence. Every person there felt the shift. The power dynamic, so solid a moment ago, now seemed to quiver. Blackwood's grin faded into confusion. Harrington cleared his throat. "Your Honor, this theatrics—" Judge Vance silenced him with a single raised finger, his gaze never leaving Ethan. He studied the boy, the protective stance, the defiant angle of his chin, and the old, broken man he shielded. He looked at Blackwood's smug face, then at the nervous police. Years on the bench had given him an instinct. He had seen guilt, innocence, lies, and truth. But this was something else. This was a vow, a primal, unbreakable vow. The words, "I'll make you walk," echoed in his mind. They were not a physical threat of violence, he realized. They carried a darker, more profound weight. In that silent moment, Judge Alistair Vance, a man who thought he had seen everything, knew he was in the presence of a story far deeper than a petty assault case. The laughter was gone. Only the heavy truth of a son's promise remained. He stood up. The entire court, as if pulled by strings, rose with him in a rustle of fabric and shock. He did not call for order. He did not cite contempt. He simply stood, a towering figure of black robe, and said, his voice low but carrying to every corner, "Court is adjourned. All parties will remain. Bailiff, secure the room." He then pointed a steady finger not at Ethan, but at the now pale Robert Blackwood. "And you," he said, "will sit down. We are not finished." The script had been flipped. The farce was over. The real trial, it seemed, was just beginning. Judge Alistair Vance did not retake his seat. He remained standing, a monolith of black robes against the dark wood of the bench, his presence sucking the oxygen from the room. The command to secure the room had been obeyed. The heavy doors were shut, and a bailiff stood before them, cutting off the world outside. The playful mockery that had filled the space, moments before, had curdled into a thick, anxious silence. Robert Blackwood shifted uncomfortably in his plush chair, his lawyer Harrington leaning in to whisper furiously, but the developer's eyes were fixed on the judge, searching for a familiar cue of complicity and finding none. Ethan Reed still stood before the bench, one arm around his trembling father, Samuel. But his posture had changed. The explosive fury was gone, replaced by a cold, watchful stillness. He looked not at his accuser, but at the judge, as if waiting for him to understand a language only they, too, could speak. Vance finally broke the silence, his voice not booming but precise, each word a scalpel. "The court's interest has been pivoted," he began, his eyes scanning the frozen tableau. "We were debating an alleged assault, but a more pressing testimony has just been offered. Not from the witness stand, but from the well of the court. A promise, or perhaps," he said, turning his gaze fully upon Ethan, "a reminder." He sat down slowly, steepling his fingers. "Young man, Ethan Reed, you made a statement to this court."
"I will make you walk. Explain yourself."
Harrington was on his feet. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. This vagrant is in contempt." He threatened the court. "Sit down, Mr. Harrington," Vance said without looking at him. "I am assessing the nature of the threat." "Proceed, Mr. Reed." Ethan gently guided his father to a chair. He then turned, standing alone in the center of the room. He looked at Blackwood, whose face was now beaded with a fine sweat. "It's not a threat, Your Honor," Ethan said, his voice clear and steady, devoid of its earlier rage. "It's a statement of fact. I will make him walk, the same way his father walked." A confused murmur rippled through the room. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "My father died in his bed, you little fool," he spat, a fraction of his bravado returning. "A respected man." "Respected?" Ethan's smile was a thin, grim line. "Jonathan Blackwood, founder of Blackwood Holdings. He died comfortable, that's true, but for 10 years before he died, he walked. He walked everywhere. He walked until his expensive shoes wore through. He walked through markets and slums, through rain and heat. He walked because he had no choice. He walked because he was looking for something he could never find, a way out of a promise he broke." Judge Vance's breath caught almost imperceptibly. A distant memory, a fragment from his earliest days on the bench, stirred. A strange case, more of a local legend, involving an old fortune and a bizarre condition. Harrington scoffed. "Fantastical stories. Your Honor, this is nonsense." "Let him continue," Vance commanded, his eyes glued to Ethan. "How do you know this, Ethan? What is your connection to Jonathan Blackwood?" Samuel Reed, the old taxi driver, let out a soft, broken sob. Ethan nodded, acknowledging his father's pain. "My grandfather, Arthur Reed, was Jonathan Blackwood's oldest friend. They grew up in the same orphanage. They were brothers in every way that mattered. When they were young men, with nothing but hope, they found a small treasure, a haul of antique silver coins from a hidden cellar in a derelict house they were paid to clear. It was enough to start 2 lives. They made a vow, a blood oath. They would split the treasure equally. They would use it as seed capital. And they swore, on the memory of the mothers they never knew, that whichever man found greater success would forever ensure the well-being of the other's family. It was a pact of brotherhood, not business. Ethan paused, the history hanging in the silent court. Jonathan used his share to get into property. My grandfather, a simpler man, used his to buy a fleet of 2 taxis and a small garage. For a time, all was well. They celebrated each other's wins. Then Jonathan's ambitions grew. He needed capital for a major deal. The very deal that built the first Blackwood Plaza. He came to my grandfather, not for a loan, but for the rest of the silver coins. He said the pact meant they should pool resources for the biggest opportunity. My grandfather, trusting his brother, gave him everything. The written pact was signed, witnessed, but the new deal had only one name on it, Jonathan Blackwood. Blackwood was pale now, his hand gripping the table edge. Lies, there is no such document. Ethan ignored him. The deal succeeded beyond dreams. Jonathan Blackwood became a millionaire. My grandfather asked for his fair share, as per their pact. He was laughed out of the office. He was told he was a small-time driver who wouldn't know what to do with real wealth. Broken in spirit, Arthur Reed died a poor man, leaving his son, my father, Samuel, with a dying taxi business and a story no one believed. Samuel nodded, tears streaming down his lined face. I tried to talk to Mr. Jonathan many times. He would just get a strange, frightened look in his eyes and have me removed. He started walking. It was all he ever did in his last years. Ethan's voice grew colder. Before he died, consumed by guilt or madness, Jonathan Blackwood came to our one-room home. He was a shell, mumbling, wearing worn-out shoes. He looked at my father and said, "The oath knows. The oath will collect. One will make the other walk." Then he left. We didn't understand. We thought it was the rambling of a sick old man. Until a month ago, Ethan pulled a folded, yellowed piece of paper from his pocket. He didn't hand it up. He simply held it for the judge to see. My grandfather's lawyer died. In his safe we found this, the original blood oath, and with it a later addendum document, signed by Jonathan Blackwood in a shaky hand during his final year. It admits the betrayal, and it states the penance, self-imposed, "For my sin I walk, and if my line ever seeks to harm the line of Arthur Reed, the walking curse shall pass to my heir, until balance is restored." He didn't mean a physical disability. He meant walking in shame, in exposure, in loss, to be stripped of every vehicle of power and wealth, and to walk the earth as the common man he swore to protect. Robert Blackwood had sunk into his chair, all color drained from his face. The smugness was gone, replaced by a dawning, horrific recognition. He had heard the stories of his father's final, inexplicable years, the endless, aimless walking, the psychiatric evaluations that found no ailment. The family had called it a peculiar dementia. Ethan locked eyes with him. "You didn't just try to take my father's newsstand. Mr. Blackwood, you tried to erase the last remnant of Arthur Reed's line from a spot of land you coveted. You invoked the clause. So now I will make you walk. I will take this to every newspaper. I will sue you for the original share, compounded over 50 years. I will use the blood oath and the confession to tell the world how the Blackwood fortune was truly built on the broken back of a brother. You will walk from your offices. You will walk from your clubs. You will walk through the courts for the rest of your life. That is my promise." The courtroom was utterly still. Judge Vance looked from the trembling, ruined magnate to the steadfast young man holding the yellowed papers. This was no longer a simple assault case. It was the unveiling of a curse, not of magic but of conscience. Given power by a written oath and a son's love, the law had to acknowledge the deeper justice at play. The past has been unveiled, revealing a curse of conscience. But what will Judge Vance do? Can the law address a decades-old blood oath? Will Robert Blackwood face his father's walking curse? The silence in courtroom number 4 was no longer merely an absence of sound. It had become a tangible entity, heavy with the weight of unveiled history and the specter of a moral reckoning that transcended legal statute. Robert Blackwood looked as if the polished marble floor had opened beneath his expensive leather shoes. His lawyer, Harrington, had ceased his frantic whispering and now stared, slack-jawed, at the aged papers in Ethan Reed's steady hand. The air conditioning hummed, the only mechanical heartbeat in the room, emphasizing the human stillness. Judge Alistair Vance remained seated, his steepled fingers pressed to his lips, his gaze a pendulum swinging between the ashen-faced developer and the resolute young man before him. He was no longer merely a judge adjudicating a minor charge. He had become an arbiter on the threshold between contemporary law and ancient justice. Finally, he lowered his hands, the sound of his palms meeting the bench soft yet definitive. "Bailiff," he said, his voice echoing in the quiet, "bring the documents to the bench." The bailiff, moving with a reverence usually reserved for holy texts, took the fragile pages from Ethan and delivered them to Judge Vance. The judge carefully unfolded them, adjusting his glasses. The court waited, breath held, as his eyes scanned the spidery ink of the blood oath, the childish earnestness of "Forever, brothers," and then the shaky, desperate script of Jonathan Blackwood's final addendum, the admission of guilt, the description of the penance. After a full minute, Vance looked up, not at the lawyers, but at Samuel Reed. "Mr. Reed, for decades, your family believed this story was powerless. A sad tale. Why did you never pursue it legally?" Samuel stood slowly, leaning on the chair for support. His voice was a rasp of weathered dignity. "Your Honor, we were poor." He was powerful. "The paper was lost, and it was not about money. It was about the betrayal. The law, we thought, could not mend a broken brotherhood. It could only punish. We wanted no punishment. We just wanted to be left alone with our tea stall." He gestured weakly towards his son. "But when they came to take even that, when they pushed my boy, the past woke up." Vance gave a slow, grave nod. He then turned his attention to Robert Blackwood. "Mr. Blackwood, do you, as the heir and principal of Blackwood Holdings, recognize the signature of your father, Jonathan Blackwood, on this addendum?" Blackwood opened his mouth, a denial clearly his first instinct, but the words died before they left his throat. He had seen enough of his father's later signatures on charitable donations, signed in moments of morbid guilt. The flamboyant loop of the J had deteriorated into a desperate scrawl. He saw that same scrawl now. Harrington found his voice. "Your Honor, even if authentic, this is irrelevant. It's a coerced or delusional document with no legal bearing on my client's property rights or on this assault case." "You are correct, Mr. Harrington," Vance said to everyone's surprise. "In the strictest, narrowest sense of property law and criminal statute, this document does not transfer title or prove assault." A flicker of hope ignited in Blackwood's eyes. But Vance continued, his tone dropping into something quieter, more profound. "However, this court is not merely a calculator of statute. It is a crucible of justice, and justice has a memory. These papers may not be a contract enforceable by a civil court, but they are evidence. Evidence of motive, of character, and of a profound unresolved debt that has now violently boiled to the surface." He leaned forward, his eyes like chips of flint. "The assault case against Samuel Reed is dismissed. The evidence presented today clearly establishes provocation and a pattern of harassment by agents of Blackwood Holdings, designed to incite a reaction. Furthermore, I am citing Robert Blackwood for contempt of this court's process, for attempting to manipulate the judicial system to perpetrate a further injustice upon a family his own wronged." Blackwood shut up. "You can't do that." "I can, and I have," Vance stated flatly. "But that is the least of your concerns. Mr. Blackwood, Mr. Ethan, Reed has announced his intention to file a civil suit for restitution based on unjust enrichment and fraud, using these documents as foundational evidence. Given the publicity this will now inevitably garner, I suspect the case will be formidable." He then did something extraordinary. He addressed Ethan directly, man to man, bypassing all legal protocol. "Young man, you spoke of making him walk. The law can facilitate that journey. It can strip away the vehicles of ill-gotten privilege, but it cannot force a man to feel the road beneath his feet. That is a journey of the soul, and it is one only he can choose to undertake. The law will give you your day in civil court. It may return to you what was stolen with interest. But the walking your grandfather's oath speaks of, that verdict lies beyond my gavel. Ethan held the judge's gaze and bowed his head slightly. I understand, Your Honor. Ensuring he faces the road is enough. Whether he learns from the journey is his own burden. Judge Vance brought his gavel down once. Crack. The criminal case is concluded. Samuel Reed is free to go. Contempt charges against Robert Blackwood will be processed. This court is now adjourned. The finality of the sound broke the spell. Blackwood stumbled out, surrounded by a now frantic Harrington, already hissing about appeals and damage control. But his empire, built on a secret shame, was already cracking. The story, as Ethan promised, would walk out of this room and into the world. Ethan helped his father to his feet. Samuel placed a trembling hand on his son's face. You did it. You made him hear. As they turned to leave, Judge Vance's voice stopped them from the now empty bench. Mr. Reed. They turned. The judge had stepped down from his podium. He stood at their level. He looked at the blood oath in his hand, then extended it back to Ethan. This belongs to your family. The law has seen it. Now let it guide your future, not anchor you to a painful past. Your justice will be in the life you build from here, free from his shadow. Ethan took the papers, his eyes glistening. Thank you, Your Honor. As the Reeds walked out of the courtroom, the weight was gone from Samuel's shoulders. He stood taller. Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds. They did not look back at the courthouse, a place of ending, but towards the street, a place of beginning. Across town, in his tinted car, Robert Blackwood stared unseeingly at the city flowing past his window. The buildings, some bearing his name, now felt like tombstones. His phone buzzed incessantly, board members, journalists. He did not answer. For the first time, he saw the people on the sidewalk, walking with purpose, with struggle, with life. He saw the newsstands, the taxi ranks, the thousand small struggles he had spent a lifetime ignoring or crushing. The walking had begun. Not yet with his feet, but with his mind, trudging through the mire of his inheritance. He had been made to walk, and the path ahead was long, exposed and utterly unfamiliar. And so the promise was kept, not by magic but by truth, not by violence but by unwavering courage. Ethan Reed used the memory of a broken oath to defend his father and challenge a giant. Remember, viewers, the deepest justice often begins as a whisper from the past, waiting for a courageous voice in the present. If this story of the promise moved you, if you believe in the power of truth and kindness to redress even the oldest wrongs, then please support our channel. Like this video, share this story of resilience, and subscribe to Kindness True Stories for more narratives where light confronts shadow and goodness finds its way. Thank you for watching.